Hold out your hand in front of you. What do you see? What if I were to tell you that that hand in front of you isn't real? Would you feel that I'm crazy? Would you feel that it's really there? What if I were to tell you that it's actually an illusion in front of you? You see, this is actually quantum physics in action. And it's truly a way that we can use science to explain spirit and the spirit world. So if you're interested in learning and better understanding what spirit really is and how we can explain spirit using scientific principles, then stay tuned. Welcome to the Spirits Beside Us podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lippincott. I'm an ex-Wall Street analyst turned international medium, spiritual teacher, and best-selling author. Each week we'll dive into the fascinating and uplifting arena of the non-physical world to help you deepen your understanding and spiritual connection to the unseen realm. We'll also share a behind-the-scenes look with others who've done the same and speak with experts in the field about their experiences. Pull up a seat and let's dive into these perspective-changing conversations. A lot of people ask, how can I better understand spirit? Can science help? Are there any kind of explanations I can use? Well, today I'm going to dive deep into spirit. I'm going to try to explain it using some fundamental scientific principles. We're going to use that to explain spirit as well as consciousness. We're also going to take a look at quantum physics. We're going to explore some basic concepts within quantum physics, and that actually supports what spirit is. It's going to support the concept of consciousness, the spirit world, and we're going to go into it. And don't worry, it's not going to be something that is so difficult to understand, because I'm certainly no scientist, but I'm really going to just use some of the very fundamental concepts that I've learned over the years that really helped me get over that hurdle to understand spirit. So one thing to think about is when you're using quantum physics, there's actually a concept in quantum physics that states that 99.9% of everything in existence is actually empty space. And everything in there is basically filled with nothing but energy. So quantum physics is telling us that 99% of everything in existence is empty space, and it's just filled with energy. So one example that you can use to understand that is, let's take the example of a carbon atom. Look at that carbon atom, look at the nucleus of that carbon atom, and if you expand that nucleus of the carbon atom to the size of a golf ball, the electron for that nucleus, remember the electrons go around the nucleus, the electron would be 2 miles away from the nucleus. And everything between the nucleus and the electron would just be filled with empty space. It would all be energy. And that's just a mind-blowing concept. It's a mind-blowing understanding that everything that we have is just empty space filled with energy. So everything ultimately is energy. And in fact, this was something that was also underscored by the father of quantum physics, Albert Einstein. Actually, he was if you want to think about it, he was really sort of the grandfather of quantum physics. And what he is well known for saying is that reality is merely an illusion, although a very persistent one. He also stated that the distinction between the past, the present, and the future is really only a stubbornly persistent illusion. So think about that. That time is merely an illusion. And that's really what spirit has been telling us for years. I mean, spirit beings, in their automatic writings, in their mediumship readings that they give us, in the explanations they have for us, they're always stating that they don't experience time, they don't know time, they don't really have time the way we know it. For time is really something that is defined by physical distance. It's a human construct, and it's something that doesn't exist in the non-physical realm. And they've said for ages that they don't have time. They measure the passage of time through milestones or events, the passage of events. And that's actually something that sounds very similar to quantum mechanics. So when you think about quantum mechanics as sort of a sidebar of quantum physics, it's just something that is that much more specific. So here's some more quantum physics for you that might slightly bend your mind, but just bear with me as we walk through it, because some of these ideas are fascinating. And when you begin to realize that quantum physics has been explaining the reality of spirit for years, it becomes that much more tangible to us. And it helps us to understand the reality of spirit and the spirit world and the fact that our consciousness lives on beyond what we consider to be the physical death. So one incredible aspect of quantum physics is the theory of superposition. And in the theory of superposition, quantum physicists have discovered something that's absolutely amazing. Now, throughout all the subatomic structures, we know that there are electrons, different particles, you've got protons, you've got quarks, all these tiny subatomic pieces of existence that are parts of atoms that make up atoms. All these subatomic particles, they're all capable of being in hundreds of places simultaneously. That's something that is the superposition theory. They're all capable of being in the same place at once. And they're all capable of being in hundreds of places simultaneously. And the only way that that's possible is that if everything is energy at its most fundamental level. And another thing that's very interesting is that if you compare that with what we've heard about spirit or angelic beings being at multiple places at once, the parallels are uncanny. If you have these subatomic particles under the theory of superposition that can be at multiple places at once, yet we're hearing that spirit beings and supposed angels are also able to be at multiple places at once, they suddenly come together at the same theory, and it makes all of this that much more plausible. So quantum physics is actually showing how all these theories that we've heard in either religion or spirituality, how they're actually possible from a scientific perspective. Now, there's another aspect, there's another theory that makes this even more plausible, and this is even more interesting, because superposition is only possible under something called the Copenhagen interpretation, and it's another wild concept. So the Copenhagen interpretation states that a quantum particle exists in all possible states simultaneously, all different states simultaneously. So it can be a gas, it can be material, it can be liquid, it can be non-physical, it can be all these different states at once. It doesn't have any one particular state. It's all of them at the same time. However, it's only going to actualize into one location. It can be everywhere at once, but it's only going to actualize into one location when it's acted upon by another energy. And in our case, that's our human consciousness. So what that's really stating is that the moment we think about that thing, it comes into reality, into that location, which is absolutely incredible, because it goes to the concept of what we think about, we bring about. I'm sure we've probably all heard sayings just like that. It's the theory of what your mind is considering or thinking, you can manifest it. It's the whole concept of manifestation. So therefore, the reality is we're experiencing it seems really to be the result of our human consciousness. And that human consciousness is essentially interfacing with quantum levels of existence that are just pure levels of energy. So think about the fact that when you are thinking about something, you create it, because that one thing is in multiple places all at once. And it only locates into one place when you think about it with your thought energy. There was a well-known Austrian theoretical physicist whose name was Erwin Schrödinger, and he described that whole process well. He said, what we observe as material bodies and forces are nothing but shapes and variations in space. And he said that particles are just Schumann kommen, appearances, and that essentially everything in the universe is energy, which is going right back to what we were talking about before. The whole concept that everything that we know about, 99.9% of everything is empty space, and it's all energy. So let's go back to that example of the hand that I was talking about at the very beginning of the episode. Now, I opened our discussion with the concept of the hand. So now what I want you to do is to look at one of your hands, take your finger, and touch the palm of your other hand. Now, when you touch the palm of your other hand, it feels pretty solid, right? Feels like, oh yeah, sure, it's there. I'm touching my other hand. Now, what if I was to tell you that, in fact, you weren't actually touching the palm of your hand at all? That when your finger is seemingly touching the palm of your hand, it's not touching anything. Now, this is something that's also coming from a concept in physics called electron repulsion theory. And under that theory, things can never touch because everything contains electrons. You know that atoms are composed of electrons. We were just talking about that earlier, right? So electrons are negatively charged subatomic particles that exist in atoms. And they repel each other kind of like magnets. Remember when you were young and you had two different magnets and you tried to put the same poles of those magnets together, and you tried to face them together and you tried to have them touch? They would never touch. You'd try to bring the same polarity of those two magnets together and make them touch, and they refuse to touch. They would never touch. You could never get them to touch, right? Those two poles of those magnets will never touch, and the stronger the magnet, the more they repel. This is the same principle that they use in maglev trains, magnetic levitation trains, or maglevs. They'll use huge magnets, really powerful magnets that are highly charged with large electric conductors that go through them to make them even more powerful. And they'll keep the same polarity of those magnets facing each other, and that's keeping the train from touching the track. So it's literally elevated above the track. And if it's elevated above the track, the maglev train has no friction, and then it's quickly pulled along by electric current and the magnets themselves as they fly along this, what I'll refer to as this little buffer, which is essentially something where they are moving along, and you can, ride at 300 miles an hour. That's where most of the Japanese trains work. They're riding at 300 miles an hour, or in some cases 350 miles an hour, based on magnetic levitation. Nothing's touching. So that's actually very efficient. Now, the same thing's happening when we're trying to touch another thing. We're never actually touching anything. It's essentially our brain interpreting that we're coming close to something. We'll feel that sense of one series of electrons trying to touch another thing. Our brain is interpreting it. Our brain is forecasting it. Our brain is trying to create and forecast what is going on, because our brain is a fantastic forecasting mechanism based on the experience it's had in the past. And we have to have some way of understanding our environment, our surroundings. So our brain says, oh, I'm touching something. Oh, I feel something. When in fact, it's not anything that you're physically touching at all. It's really interpreting the electromagnetic force between the atoms that are creating the electron repulsion. It's essentially the electrons that are repulsing, and you're feeling that energy. So in fact, the perceived touching is actually more like you're hovering at a number that is 10 raised to the minus 8 meters. And then that's an infinitesimal number. It's so small, you can't even see it. It's the amount of space just keeps on getting smaller and smaller and smaller. If you were to look at it, you'd need a highly powered electron microscope even to see anything close to it. You may not even be able to see it at that point. It's so small and infinitesimal that we can't even perceive it. So whether or not two things can touch really depends on what we mean by touch and what we perceive to be per touch. It's all in our perception, right? So perception is critical here. Our brain is telling us one thing. Our senses are telling our brain something, and our brain's interpreting it. Because our senses are basically the input, our brain's interpreting it, and we're understanding through perception what our brain is telling us. So our experience seems essentially limited by the perception and our view of the world based on the senses that are giving us data. The data is going into our brain is interpreting it, and our brain is perceiving it, and our brain is telling us what we think is happening. And that's often summarized by the saying, seeing is believing, right? We've all heard that phrase. We've all heard the phrase, it's seeing is believing. So when we see something, we think, oh, okay, it must be real, because that's what we've lived with our entire life. We do believe that what we see is what's there. It's what we perceive. And it's really something that we've been doing our entire lives. And there's a great example. There is a wonderful allegory that Plato wrote, and it's called the Allegory of the Cave. In this allegory, Plato wrote that there were 3 prisoners who lived their entire life in a cave. They were chained to the wall of a cave, and they were facing the wall. They grew up in the cave. They knew nothing else but the cave. They lived their entire lives facing the cave wall. They knew nothing but that cave wall. There was nothing outside it. They didn't know anything about it. That was their entire life. That's their entire experience. And what they would do is, over their lifetimes, they would watch the shadows that were projected on the wall from different objects that were passing in front of a fire behind them. And they'd see the shadows that were cast on the wall, and they'd see those shadows as real people. So they thought that the shadows on the wall were people, so they referred to them as shadow people, and they thought those were real. They didn't know anything else. Now, these shadow people became their reality. They didn't know anything else. They knew nothing. They grew up staring at that wall, and that was their entire existence. However, there was one prisoner who escaped from the chains, and he left the chains, left the wall, found his way outside the cave. And what shocked him was that when he left the cave, he found this world of trees and animals and sunshine and green grass and bushes and vegetables and a wonderful temperature and wonderful breeze and glorious lakes and mountains and just the world that we know in nature, right? He saw all this and was absolutely shocked. And he saw all the different animals that were going around. He saw other people, and he was absolutely shocked. He couldn't believe it. But he was there for a while, and he began to understand that these were other people. These were other things. There was a whole different reality. And that his previous reality was, in fact, not the reality that he grew up knowing. He became aware of a new reality. So he goes back to the cave, goes back to his buddies, goes back to these fellow comrades in chains, right? Goes back to inform these other prisoners about the nature of the reality that he just discovered, the nature of the true reality that he experienced outside the cave, and the reality of the nature and the animals and the lakes and the mountains and the clouds and the sky and everything that he had seen. But his fellow prisoners refused to accept what he said. They refused to believe it. They refused to understand it. They refused. So they said, no, you're making this all up. That makes absolutely no sense because it's beyond their comprehension. For all they knew from their entire life was the cave. They had never seen anything beyond that. So it was totally beyond their comprehension. And what's so interesting is this allegory from Plato fits perfectly with our view of our reality on this earth. Because most of us are basically prisoners on this earth. And we're seeing our existence in this physical universe as our true reality. We haven't known anything else, right? Yet we've had countless communications from spirit who have come back and told us that there's a different reality. They've come back and to describe a different existence. They're showing us that there's something, that there is a far greater reality than what we're used to. They're telling us about a far different reality than what we know. We've all grown up knowing one thing. They're coming back and saying it's a bigger reality. It's a broader reality. It's much more colorful. It's much more diverse. It's much more peaceful and beautiful and light. Sounds much like the cave, right? Another example might be, let's say there's a goldfish, and this goldfish is swimming in the lake and is going along, or it can be any fish. Maybe there's a trout or a salmon, and he's swimming in the ocean, and one day the ocean, big wave, throws him onto the beach, and the fish winds up on the beach. His entire life he was in the water, and he thought that was everything that he knew. The water, the ocean, everything that he had grown up knowing was the water. Suddenly he's thrown onto the beach, and he's like, wait a second, what's this world? This is completely new. This is brand new. I don't know anything about this world. And there's this turtle that comes up to him and says, hey, welcome to the dry land. This is a different world. This is a different reality. And the fish is surprised. Obviously, the fish goes back into the water and tells all of his friends about the fact that there's actually dry land and there are other animals and there's bright sunshine and there are big trees out there. And obviously, his friends wouldn't believe him. It's the same idea. We're the prisoners on earth. We are the people who are limited to our experience in this reality that we understand as earth. We don't understand the reality that's far greater beyond what our senses can tell us. Yet quantum physics is telling us that there's something far greater than what our senses are allowing us to understand. Quantum physics is telling us something that we can't even grapple with. Once we get beyond the understanding that we are just physical beings, once we get beyond that and we start to realize that we in fact are energy, that we in fact are multiple places at once, that we in fact are a conscious being, a sentient being with a consciousness that is energy that lives on forever, that goes beyond what we perceive to be the physical existence, that's when the game changes completely. So this is all essentially showing that we're living on after our physical death because we are energy. And as we've spoken in prior episodes, and also well known with physics and quantum physics, that we know that energy can neither be created nor destroyed. It can only change form. And if energy can only change form, then we change into a higher vibration state. It just doesn't dissipate and go nowhere. So the belief that we just end and nothing happens and we go sort of become food for the worms, that's something that if you look at quantum physics, it completely tears that belief apart. So what I think that we really need to understand at this point is that everything in existence, even the so-called human body that we've got, and I'll use body in quotes because remember, it's really energy. Everything is energy. Everything in existence is energy. And that's really, fundamental and stands on the shoulders of all these concepts we talked about in quantum physics. And it also rests upon the idea that our reality, that our consciousness is essentially energy. It's just energy. And so that energy is ever present, always existent. It can never be destroyed. Therefore, that energy or consciousness exists far after our apparent physical death. And again, physical death is in quotes because it's not so much the death of the body. It's just the transformation of the energy from one state to another. And that quantum physics is explaining how plausible it is that it just is transferring from one state to another, and that energy continues on. So as a result, we're really gaining a much greater understanding that spirit is truly always beside us. So I hope you enjoyed this show today. It was certainly a mind-bending, mind-twisting roller coaster of different concepts. I appreciate that. I understand that. I hope I hope I tried to get some of these ideas across to you and explain them well. But this was something that was really helpful for me in beginning to understand the true nature of spirit. Because remember, I came from a very materialistic background where everything had to be proven. And this was the one thing that helped me bridge that gap from going from a materialist mindset to a spiritual and broad reality mindset. It was kind of like that man leaving the cave, seeing a new reality. I'm like, wow, there it is. It's there. So quantum physics can be very helpful. And I think as more and more people open to this idea and quantum physics starts to help us understand and show that this is something that we can really wrap our arms around, more and more people are going to understand the true and greater reality that's out there and the true reality of spirit being all around us. So if you'd like to have more information about this, definitely there's a lot of detail about the spirit world and about this whole episode in the show notes. So I encourage you to go to the show notes, take a look at some of the resources there, take a look at some of the details that I described, a lot of links to the different concepts within quantum physics. Some books will probably be there as well. If you'd like to read more about quantum physics, I think there's a book I think I got called Quantum Physics for Dummies, because I'm no scientist, believe me. So you can certainly get the show notes for that on my website, spiritsbesideus.com. And tune in next week as we explore the concepts of energy bodies, auras, chakras, and really how we're just energy and we're existing as energy. So also let me know what types of topics that you'd like to have, what things you want to hear me talk about, or what people you'd like to have on the show. Do you have any questions? Do you have any favorite topics? Do you have any favorite people that you'd love to be brought on the show and hear from? So reach out to me on my website, www.spiritsbesideus.com. And I certainly thank you for joining me today. And remember to rate and review the show, because your support really helps other listeners like you know about the show. So I thank you for joining the show today. And I'm going to sign off and thank you for listening. And this is Chris signing off, sending you love and light. Bye for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Spirits Beside Us. Make sure you head over to the show notes for all the links and information on this week's episode. You can check it out at spiritsbesideus.com. If you love this episode as much as I did, head over to rate and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're looking for a community of spiritual seekers like yourself, make sure you join my Facebook page, Spirits Beside Us Podcast on Facebook. This is Chris signing off, sending you love and light. I can't wait to connect with you again on Wednesday.